Dear ladies and gentlemen, we are very glad to welcome you all for the Zoom translation of the Russian Cultural Center. Thank you very much for joining us today. Today at the Russian Cultural Center, we have our great friend, very famous scientist, Professor William Kraft Brumfield. He's a professor at the Tulane University. And he is an author of many books devoted to Russian architecture and an author of more than 500 scientific articles regarding Russian architecture. It is our great pleasure to welcome him at the Russian Cultural Center today. A month ago, we, together with Professor Brumfield, organized his lecture on his new book, Journeys Through the Russian Empire. And it was a great success, and we received a lot of words of gratitude from participants. And Professor Brumfield kindly agreed to organize another lecture, this time also devoted to one of his recent books, Architecture at the End of the Earth, and devoted to the architecture of the Russian North. I don't really know, Professor, how you managed to write this many books in 1 year, but
not in 1 year. It's many years.
It's our great honor to welcome you here. We're very grateful for you for doing this. And with this, I would like to give the word to Professor William Brumfield for his presentation. Professor.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be back working with the Russian Cultural Center. And I look forward to our presentation today, which focuses on my work in the historic Russian North. If we could begin the presentation of the images. Are they all ready? Okay, fine, good. Here you see the jacket, front cover of my book, which appeared in 2015, Duke University Press. Superbly printed, designed. This is photographs that I took of a church at the village of Kimja. It was there in the winter and the summer of 2000. We'll talk about that village a little bit later. But just to give you an idea of the major publication, by no means the only publication, but the major publication that has come out of my field work, which has taken place in the Russian North since 1988. Now, the Russian North, what do we mean when we talk about the Russian North with capital letters? Essentially, it's the area historically known to surround the White Sea. You see there in this map, which is a very general map without very many geographical details, but you see the White Sea there in the center. At the top, we have Murmansk Oblast, then you have Karelia, which borders on Finland. We come down to Volga province, swing back up, again, toward the Arctic Circle in Arkhangelsk Oblast. The Arctic Circle, by the way, runs pretty much right through here. And we will come back to that detail twice during my presentation today. So, bearing in mind that this is the historic Russian North, capital letters, writ large, as understood by traditional approaches to history. This is what we're talking about. This area here focuses on the White Sea. Back in the medieval period, we're talking about as early as the 12th century in terms of Russian settlement, the rivers and lakes were the main conduits for transportation. And very few of those are indicated on this map, but you get an idea at least where we are on the globe. Now, if we go to the first slide, well, let me again point out Volga. That will be our base. Volga, which has done so much to support my work. I would consider it the cultural capital of the Russian North. Others might argue about that designation. But Volga will be the starting place for the three journeys that we will take today. The first will take us up the coast from a lake through Lake Onega to the White Sea, and we'll end on the Kola Peninsula, which is part of Murmansk Oblast. And the second journey, we'll come back to this map and orient ourselves. But first, we want to go up this route to the west and we will be talking about some of the high points. We can do a separate lecture on each of these journeys, and I hope to continue our series with the Russian Cultural Center, a series of YouTube broadcasts, but today we're giving an overview. So we move to Vologda. We won't spend much time there, but just to give you an idea of the extraordinary wealth of architecture here. Over on the right is the Sofia Cathedral, Sofiyski Sobor, built during the reign of Ivan the Terrible, although it was not consecrated until after his death in 1584. That's a very complicated history, and we'll leave that for some other time. Then you have the bell tower, which was rebuilt in the 19th century, and over on the left, the 18th century Resurrection Cathedral built during the reign of Catherine the Great. And in the background, we have the so-called Vologda Kremlin. So there's a lot to see in Vologda. We can talk about it in greater length, but that will be our starting point for our journeys. Just give you an idea of the interior of the St. Sophia Cathedral, the frescoes here in a photograph that I took in 2012, 2014. All of these photographs are precisely dated in the book, part of my field work, which is held in the collection of the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. So here we get a sense of the magnificent interior of these cathedrals. Again, that is a separate lecture, and we will move on. Vologda is known for its wooden houses. Many of them have been preserved, others have not. But this is a photograph of a house from the 19th century, very fanciful decoration, typical of the Vologda style, and also typical of the urban environment in the Russian north. And on the edge, the Savior, the Spaso Priludsky, Savior Priludsky, a monastery founded by Dmitry Priludsky in the 15th century. This extraordinary view that I took back in the early part of this century, with the restoration of the monastery. So this is where we're starting, our starting point. Then we're going to move up to, eventually, we got to some of the high points of Russian wooden architecture. Vologda has one such example, a church from the Alexander Kushsky Monastery, moved here and reconstructed. That 10th tower at the top. We'll be seeing more types of that wooden architecture in the course of our lecture. So now we go to Lake Onega and the island of Kizhi. It's on the UNESCO list of World Heritage Monuments, one of the most famous places in Russia from the point of view of traditional culture. Over on the left, we see the Transfiguration Cathedral built in 1714. Extraordinary structure, one of the most distinctive in Russia. Here we have a 19th century bell tower, and over on the right, the church built half century later in the middle of the 18th century, was dedicated to the intercession of the Virgin. So this complex is on its original site. The Kizhi Island is now an outdoor museum with examples of wooden architecture brought from elsewhere in this region, which is a part of the Karelian Republic within the Russian Federation. Many of you have perhaps seen Kizhi, or perhaps even been there. Summer cruises between Moscow and Petersburg have stopped here, so that it has been the object of adoration of many thousands of tourists. The church over on the left, Cathedral of the Transfiguration, had to be disassembled and rebuilt in order to prevent catastrophic dislocation. When I photographed it, in this photograph in 1993, you can see these beams that were holding the structure up. But fortunately, I was able to photograph the structure without scaffolding before the major restoration work took place. And we move on. These are other views from the east view. Here you see the Church of the Dormition over on the left, and over on the right, the Church of the Transfiguration. East view with the apse, we can see here on both churches is where the main altar was in its own dome. 22 cupolas in the Church of Transfiguration that we see here in a view taken in 1993. And this is perhaps one of the most remarkable photographs that I took. It was in August of 1991, a historic period, by the way, for those of you who remember the final period of the Soviet Union. It was taken in August the 6th, 1991, after a thunderstorm, which had moistened the wooden sides of the church and the aspen shingles of the domes. and the setting sun reflected off of a sort of golden hue that seems to transform the very material of which the church was made. Another view of the Kiji Pagost, as it's called, a sacred precinct that had a cemetery surrounding it. This is the original site. The wall has been reconstructed, but the original buildings of the 18th and 19th centuries on their original place, one of the major monuments of Russian architecture on the UNESCO World Heritage List. Another view of the intercession church built for use in the winter. And we can see all of these seemingly decorative details, but they also had a functional purpose. This is, you can see this water spouts here that catch water runoff, melting snow, and throw it away from the walls of the structure to avoid excessive moisture content and the danger of rot. These buildings exist in a complex ecological balance. Moisture is essential, but excessive moisture also will destroy the monuments. And periodically they had to be repaired. The logs would be replaced, but that requires constant maintenance. And at the top, we can see the aspen shingles coating the cupolas of this and other churches of the Russian North. Many of these were replaced in the 19th century with metal sheathing because the shingles will decay more rapidly than the logs, and it was considered more attractive to have metal cupolas. Things have changed since the turn of the 20th century, and almost all of these cupolas have now been returned to their aspen shingled form, which originally characterized them. Another view of the great Transfiguration Church with its 22 cupolas, and some people count 23 cupolas. There's been a great debate over how many there actually have been, but here we see it from the southeast with the altar apse in that lower structure over to the right of the photograph. This view was taken in 2007. And then we go up still farther along the White Sea coast. If Kiji is located in Lake Onega, ultimately Lake Onega was a conduit to the White Sea itself. We go up the coast in the southwestern part of the White Sea. There is the Solovetsky Archipelago, which is so well known in history, often for tragic reasons. Alexander Solzhenitsyn wrote a monumental defining study of the monastery during its years when it was used as a gulag prison in the 1920s and 1930s. But now it has been returned to the church and has been restored since the damage of the Soviet period. A very complicated story behind this ensemble. There again, we could do a separate lecture. Perhaps that will be something that we will undertake in the future. But here you see my west view taken almost at midnight, right around the summer solstice, the end of June. This view was taken in 1998. Transfigurative power of light, we've already seen it with the Kiji Church of the Transfiguration. Now we see it with the Cathedral of the Transfiguration over there on the left, built again during the reign of Ivan the Terrible, as was the Sophia Cathedral in Vologda. We can see how the North was formed in many ways during Ivan the Terrible's reign. The Transfiguration Festival is celebrated in the middle of August in the Russian church calendar. It's one of the highest church feasts in the Orthodox canon. And the notion that transfiguration refers to a miracle of light. And you can see the miracle of light actually occurring in these photographs taken during the summer. That is such a powerful, evocative impression in the Russian North. That summer light, which exists for almost 24 hours this far north. Other examples, let's see, we need to make sure that the computer doesn't fall on us. All right, we'll continue. This is a view taken from the west of the monastery during the daytime, a totally different impression of the view of the monastery. and across the monastery harbor. Yeah, we're doing fine now. Thank you. And this is the Cathedral of the Transfiguration itself, built during the reign of Ivan the Terrible, 1560s, excuse me. There are stories behind each of these buildings, stories that could take us the entire hour, but this is primarily a survey today, an introduction to what I hope will be further demonstrations in the future. This was a photograph that I took in 1998. Another photograph from the west after a thunderstorm, very late at night. You can see the mirror calm of the Bay of Felicity, it's called, on the west side of the monastery. This was the primary harbor, which pilgrims and others reached the monastery before the Soviet period. And that sense of transfiguration, even without the direct sunlight, there's a sense of mystery, extraordinary grace on this ensemble. Very complicated and often tragic history within these walls, and yet it survives as a monument to Russia's spiritual heritage. I just can't get away from that west view of the monastery, and here in the foreground we see the Ancient Mariner. Those of you who might have read the epic poem by Samuel Taylor Coleridge about the rhyme of the Ancient Mariner. Well, you know, at the end, he is condemned to or consigned to wander throughout the earth and tell his story of destruction and redemption. Well, we might think that perhaps he ended up here at Solovetsky Monastery. In any event, the fisherman there is repairing his boat, putting a copper plate at the bottom of it. And, these boats are actually seaworthy. They can go out into the White Sea. I've been in them, and I can attest to that fact. And this is the view from an airplane that I took with very fast film. There you can see the monastery, which had such a tragic history during the 1920s and 30s, now revived, and the village environment that surrounds it. An extraordinary monument to the endurance and vitality of Russian history and Russian culture, reflected in its architecture. And then we move up to the Kola Peninsula. This will be the third part of our excursion today. The south shore of the Kola Peninsula. Here we see the village of Varzyga. In the background, there's the Varzyga River. It's very near the White Sea. It's about 15 kilometers from the White Sea coast. It's a prosperous fishing village. And over on the left is, again, one of those extraordinary monuments that seem to defy construction logic that existed in the Russian north. And a few of them are still preserved. The Church of the Dormition of the Virgin, built in 1678, if memory serves, the latter part of the 17th century, and still standing in this little gravity-defying, soaring form. The planks and shingles have been replaced, but the basic structure is late 17th century, remarkably well built. And over on the right is the Winter Church, dedicated to St. Athanasius, built in the middle of the 19th century, used for worship year-round. These tall churches were usually not heated and only used for summer worship. But the parish would then worship in a smaller structure, could be more easily heated during the year round. You see the background, the houses of the fishing village. Here is one of those magical photographs taken around midnight of the Church of the Dormition of the Virgin Mary. What can I say about this northwest view? When the clouds behind it, which are so important, a part of many of my photographs in Russia, how the clouds in some way bring a vital element, how these monuments relate to the surrounding environment that created them, the ecology of these monuments. The monuments themselves often escape the history of art as presented in the West, but when seen in their environment, within the historical context, they have an enormous and very important significance. how these communities, which serfdom did not exist, how these communities existed and flourished in such a remote and in many ways severe region. We're getting here, right? Varsaga is in fact close to the Arctic Circle, just a few kilometers south of the Arctic Circle. And here a detail. Now, the church has recently, this church has recently been renovated, repaired, which of course that needed to be done. But they also placed plank siding. Now, plank siding was often placed on these wooden churches in the late 19th century, early 20th century, because it could be painted and it seemed to give them a more attractive appearance. This is a topic that's been debated and is still debated in Russian religious and preservation circles. But I'm just glad I was able to photograph this building before they put the plank siding back on. We know it had plank siding at the beginning of the 20th century. Soviet period, they took it off. So you could see the structure, the authentic structure, as it was called. Now the siding has again been replaced. Fine, if that's what the parish wants, that is entirely up to them. But these details that you see in my photograph here, essential details of both the construction and the aesthetics of that construction, they're now hidden from view. So I'm fortunate to be able to share that with you. And these photographs appear in my book, Architecture at the End of the Earth. Another view of the Varsaga River. The village exists on both sides of the river. Over there, we're looking at the St. Nicholas side, refers to a modest church built in the 18th century on that side. So it's called the St. Nicholas side. We've just been on the most pure Mother of God side, referring to the Church of the Dormition. So each side of the village had its name based on the churches that were located there. You can see the villager in a skiff with a motor attached to it. And these are essentially your ways of ferrying from one side of the village to the other. I rode on that skiff many, many times. We can see them, skiffs actually on the beach on the other side. A part of village life is still preserved. This village is prosperous because it has many very well-heeled tourists coming in for salmon fishing. There's a salmon fishing camp upriver. But money sometimes means that people no longer want to preserve the traditional houses. They want houses with more conveniences and that are easier to maintain. So this is a complicated story. What does it take to maintain villages that have these examples of traditional culture in the Russian north? And here we see the sand dunes behind the village, showing that we are close to the coast of a major body of water, the White Sea. Some of the traditional crosses that continue to be used as the generations pass in this village, which is one of the most extraordinary that I've visited in Russia. Now, back to our map. Go back to Vologda, which you see there in the, if you can follow my arrow, here is Vologda. So we've been up to Kizhi, right here on Lake Onega, and then we were up to the Solovyetsky Monastery right here in the southwest part of the White Sea, and then we were up to Varsaga right here on the southern coast of the Kola Peninsula. Now, we go back down to Vologda. We're going to go up through the center, our second excursion, which will take us up along the Onega River. This map is not helping us much with the geographical details, but that's okay. You can just trust me, and then you can go and find better maps on your own. But here, Vologda will take us up through the center toward the great monastery communities, and eventually up to Kargable on the Onega River, which empties into the White Sea. Remember, the Onega River is different from Lake Onega. A bit confusing, perhaps, but once you get the difference, it's not a problem to keep them straight. This is the St. Cyril Monastery of White Lake, Beloe ozero. This is not White Lake here. This is Siverskoye Lake, but White Lake is nearby, defining feature of those waterways that meant so much to the Russian north during the medieval and even well into the 19th century. In fact, those waterways are still used, I might add, for both tourist and commercial transportation. But we move up just a few kilometers to the west of the St. Cyril Monastery. We have the Feraponta Monastery, smaller, dedicated to the Nativity of the Virgin, quite a bit smaller. But here again, we have a UNESCO World Heritage Monument because at the turn of the 16th century, frescoes were painted inside that little cathedral over there to the right, dedicated to the Nativity of the Virgin. Frescoes were painted that have come to define some of the highest in medieval Russian art, painted by the artist Dionysius and his sons. We'll go inside. There's the cathedral right there, seen from the west, and we'll enter. There is the interior. So this is a UNESCO World Heritage Monument. The frescoes painted around 1500. In other words, at the turn of the 16th century. The extraordinary power of those frescoes and their delicacy would again be the subject of a separate lecture. Miraculously, they have been preserved, cleaned, restored for generations of art historians come. And if we move up from Feraponta, still in the territory approaching the White Sea, this is Kargopol, on the origins of the Onega River, which will flow into the White Sea, but not that far from the Solovetsky Archipelago. So these trips that we're taking today really tie into each other. And you see there in the background the Cathedral of the Nativity of Christ. There are two types of nativity cathedrals in Russia, well, at least two, one dedicated to the Virgin Mary, Nativity of Mary, and the other dedicated to the Nativity of Christ. That cathedral in the background also built during the reign of Ivan the Terrible. Not out of brick, but of local limestone, very unusual. Bell tower on the left, built during the reign of Catherine the Great, and a modest church on the right in the early 18th and 19th century, the boundary between them. This is a winter view. So we go summer, winter. I try to make in these areas, if I have the opportunity to focus in diametrically opposed seasons, because each season has its own special, miraculous, transformative light. You see late evening light in late November, fresh snowfall. And you can see how the setting sun just suffuses, makes its way into that bell tower. There's a magic created by light in these northern regions, both winter and summer. This is a summer view of Lake Lacha, which will feed into the Onega River over on the left. That's the Cathedral of the Nativity of Christ, I mentioned to you, with the buttresses over here on the right. They had to prop up the walls during subsequent centuries, but the cathedral itself built in the 16th century of local limestone. A parish church nearby, just showing you because of the light effect that I managed to capture on the late winter evening. The house, typical house in Kargopol with traditional window detailing, decorative detailing. It's an enormous weight of snow on those roofs. Be careful because those heavy snowfalls can actually destroy the upper part of the house if they're not careful to regulate it and, when necessary, remove it. Just to the outside, about 20 kilometers from Kargopol, is the village of Lediny, and here is a tragic story. I was able to photograph this extraordinary ensemble like Kijy that we'd seen earlier in our lecture. You have the summer church, the tall tower. You have it was built in the middle of the 18th century. It's dedicated to the Dormition, if I'm not mistaken. Sometimes I get these names confused, but they're all properly identified in my book. And over on the left, you can see the multi-domes of the Epiphany Cathedral. It was built in the latter part of the 18th century as a winter church, and your bell tower in the center and your cemetery surrounding it. A typical pagost as we had seen at Kijy. Well, a lightning strike Easter morning 2013 hit this part of the the Intercession Church and burned it. In fact, there's even a YouTube, people happened to be driving by and photographed it with a dash cam. The fire was so intense it spread to the bell tower. Fortunately, the fire team from Cargable was able to make it in time to save the Epiphany Church. Wooden churches we know from historical records were often hit by lightning. They're very tall buildings. Well, you'd think they'd put lightning rods on it. Lightning rods don't always work. And that is another story. But we know again and again how northern churches were in fact hit in the 18th century throughout their history by lightning, and they were rebuilt. Whether they can ever reclaim this church, here I'm photographing it from the northeast during that late summer light. On the interior, you can see it was painted, one of the rare, very well-preserved examples of a heaven, a neba, a sky, with paintings of the saints and the crucifixion, archangels, all 8 of them. All of this was destroyed in the fire. Some of the icons are missing, but the interior was preserved. Now it is only a memory in my photographs. I was able to photograph there extensively in the late 1990s, and that archive is preserved as a part of my work at the National Gallery of Art. And you also see examples of it in my book, Architecture at the End of the Earth. Now we go back to Beloe for our third journey. Here we will go to the northeast, up the Sukhana River, which will take us to the town of Veliki Ustyu, located, well, actually in Volga province on the boundary with Arkhangelsk province. One of the remarkable cultural centers of the Russian North for reasons that we will see shortly. And from there, we will go up the northern Dvina River, which takes its origins at Veliki Ustyu, and end at, well, we'll leave that for a mystery. All right, so our third excursion today, the town of Veliki Ustyu, where the Sukhana River merges with the River Yug to form the northern Dvina River. This photograph, taken in January 1997, minus 30 degrees, but no breeze and not terribly humid. I'm standing on the frozen surface of the Sukhana River. You see the cathedral complex of there are 5 churches, many of them referred to as sabori or cathedrals in Russian. The term overlaps with the Western term cathedral. Sometimes Western friends ask me, art historians ask me, why are there so many cathedrals in Russian? Well, it's because the language is not a precise fit. Sabor is simply a church that transcends parish boundaries. But here we have the cathedral complex at Veliki Ustyu. And there are some of the wealthy merchant houses because this river was an artery for trade with the West, trade on the interior of Russia. Veliki Ustyu was known for its silver work. So there was a lot of money to be made here. Trading in fur, for example. Here we see merchant houses built, most of them in the late 18th and early 19th century, lining the Sukhana River, and in the background, you see the cathedral complex. Now, what I want to do is take you across the Sukhana River to a monastery, the Trinity Leden Monastery, on a very old medieval site of the original settlement of Veliki Ustyu, dating back to probably the 12th century. This church here was built in the late 17th century. And you look at it and think, well, it's a rather austere, beautiful structure with a bell tower on the west, but let's go inside. There you've got the inside. Perhaps the greatest Baroque iconostasis that I know of in Russia. That it has a lot of competition, but this is extraordinary for its sophistication, the way the elements are arranged, and its iconostasis. And it seems absolutely Catholic, counter-Reformation, Baroque style. And it is. There are these elements, and yet it is a Russian Orthodox church in the Russian North. Who would have predicted this? Again, a whole lecture we could devote to this iconostasis and to this cathedral. We step inside the doors, and here we immediately enter into a transformed architectural space. Notice that the walls here are not covered with frescoes, as in the other cathedrals that we've seen. Everything is allowed to give way to this extraordinary carved iconostasis with icons painted on canvas in a Western style. Western academic style. It was created in the latter part of the 18th century, about a century after the church's construction. There we have a detail. The photographs that I took in the late 1990s. These are a part of my collection at the National Gallery of Art, in the Photographic Archives, what's now called the Department of Image Collections at the National Gallery, there for research and for scholarship. Now, if we go up the northern Dvina River, well, what about Arkhangelsk? Well, Arkhangelsk during the Soviet period destroyed so many of its cultural monuments from the 18th century. The town was originally founded as a settlement, a monastic settlement by Ivan the Terrible, again. But it really took its start during the reign of Peter the Great, before he had consolidated the new city of St. Petersburg. This was a major outlet for Russian trade and communication with the West. Now we can see today it's a modern city, shooting it from an airplane, just as we're about to land at the Voskova Airport, the second airport, the smaller airport, the airport that will get you to Solovetsky Archipelago. And it just reminds you there is a modern part of the Russian North. If we fly over to Solovetsky Island, you will pass the city, the closed city of Severodvinsk. Severodvinsk, known because that's where ships are built. What kind of ships? Well, let's just say maybe atomic submarines. That's a secret we're not supposed to know. But this is a closed city. All sorts of ship work there and ship repair goes on. You can see it's right here on the edge of the White Sea. So there is this enormous industrial component of the Russian North as well. The Russian government has recently proclaimed that the Arctic region is going to be a region of special investment and development over the next 2 decades. We know how important with global warming Russia's enormous Arctic coastline is, so that there will be a new look at these regions in the Russian North. To sustain the populations in a extreme climatic environment. And but there's the mouth of the Dvina River. This is your moment of Zen. People know me as an architectural photographer, but I must say this is one of my favorite photographs. You can see the fresh water of the Dvina moving into the White Sea. The water is so clear and pure, you can see the ripples of the sand beneath the water. And then you have these brackish pools in green in the back part of the estuary here. I look at that and I say, this is primal. We could be talking about billions of years ago. You get a sense of the ever-changing, ever-renewing, nourishing life of our planet. This is your moment of Zen. But maybe not the last. All right, there's a photograph that I took of the great Severstal steel factory in Cherepovets, one of the largest in Russia. I think this is extraordinarily beautiful. It's done during a core where iron is converted to steel. At the moment this enormous energy-consuming process occurs, you can see the sulfur, the plume in yellow-orange bursting forth from the pipe there. The building shudders when this takes place. All of the immense amount of water, the steam raising from the converter plant, which takes iron and converts it to steel. And you can see all of this massive complex, and of course the trains in the foreground. One of my favorite compositions, the sfumato, as the Italian term is, the merging and shading of colors. I wanted to put that on an excellent book that I did about Cherepovets for Russian colleagues. It's a wonderful book. They said, oh, that's somehow anti-ecological. And they excluded this photograph from the book. Made a mistake, in my opinion. It's still a beautiful book. But this photograph, I am really now on a crusade to promote. This photograph has to appear again and again and again. It is just as a photograph, as an object of art, and I am a member of the Russian Academy of Arts, just as an artwork. It's one of my favorite. I'll go to defend this photograph at any point. It's just, you know when things click, when the eye clicks. So Is that too a moment of Zen? I would say it is. How we transform elements that exist on our planet. There you have it all, earth, water, fire. But then we go back to the Arctic Circle, to the northeast of Arkhangelsk, on the Kimsha River, which flows into the Mizan, one of the great historical rivers of the Russian North. This is the village of Kimsha with the Hadajetria Church, which I photographed in the summer of 2001. And if my memory fails me, look in the book. The book is available right here. Architecture at the End of the Earth, highly recommended. The photographs that you see today, many of them are in that book with proper captions and explanations. All of you looking at my presentation today will be getting a quiz later, but I'm an easy grader and it's an open book test, so you can find all of the answers in Architecture at the End of the Earth. All right, that's my winter view, taken in early March of 2000 and, did I say 2000 or 2001? Go to the book, find out. And there you can see the Hadajetria Church in the winter in the village covered with a deep snowdrift. In the background, stable for the, there's a summer view of the Hadajetria Church. Again, it was disassembled after I photographed it. I finally put it back together again, but it too has plank sheathing. That's my midnight view of the church. Setting sun actually is on the cover of the book, Architecture at the End of the Earth. There we can see again the view, the details, the aspen shingles. Much of the structure here is of larch, a great tough wood, but it endures forever. It's almost like iron. And there's a detail of the log fitting on the eastern part of the apse. That's the interior, which I took before the restoration of the church. It had already been returned to prayer use. It had been reconsecrated when I took this photograph in 2000 or 2001. You can correct me in the book. Another view of the village along the Kimsha River, the most beautiful village in the Russian North. I make that claim and I will defend it. Taken from the church tower of the Hadajetria Church. There's a winter view. Up the top, you see the horse's head, which symbolizes the vitality of the family in these northern houses, enormous northern houses of pre-peasants, people who made a living in a most difficult environment. But where the sea and land merge, fishing and limited agriculture, bird trapping, the forest nourishes them. Some of the houses in the summer, this village manages to hold on as a surviving example, a time capsule of the culture of the Russian North. And here you see it on the table with one of my friends there. All of these berries come from the forest nearby or from their garden plots, as does the cucumbers, the various drinks, kisin, and so forth that they make from these berries. And here in the east, once again, the Hadajetria Church of the village of Kimsha. So if we could go back to the round dance here at Kargopol. Ashevyansk, actually, near Kargopol. Ashevyansk, another village near the Kargopol region. Just to give you some lyrical views at the end of the presentation. This is the Epiphany Church there in the summer with the hay being on a rack to the hay rick, actually. And finally, this view of large birch trees and the setting winter sun in late November. The ice and snow had covered the branches. It had partially melted during the day and then refrozen. We have, once again, this extraordinary moment of light and the atmosphere. So that really we are finished with the lyrical part of the display. And here's the cover of my latest book, Journeys Through the Russian Empire, also available. We talked about that in the preceding performance, and I look forward to continuing our work with the sponsorship of your colleagues, Mark.
Dear Professor Brumfield, thank you for a wonderful lecture. We really enjoyed it a lot. And I want to bring to your attention that in 2019, Professor Brumfield was awarded an Order of Friendship by the government of the Russian Federation for his outstanding work and efforts in promoting friendship between people of Russia and America, and for his work in promoting Russian architecture abroad and Russian culture in the United States. Thank you very much for doing that, Professor.
My pleasure. Let's continue to do this.
And right now we have a possibility to ask questions if you have any, and Professor Brumfield will gladly answer them. You could request to switch on your mic, and our administrator will switch it on promptly.
Again, remind of the books that are available, very affordable, I might add, thanks to the generosity of patrons who subsidize the books, production of them, Duke University Press, Architecture at the End of the Earth, and Journeys Through the Russian Empire. Together, they very nice. They're both similar format. There they are. This is the 2015, and there's a much larger recent book, Architecture. We're comparing my work with the color images that Sergei Prokudin-Gorsky took at the beginning of the 20th century.
We will be putting this lecture online on YouTube for you to comment and ask questions over there. We apologize for a little bit of interference we had during the end of the lecture. Some technical issues, and we'll deal with them. And once again, we would like to thank Professor Brumfield for his outstanding work, and we hope to continue this series of lectures in the future. Thank you so much for joining us today, and have a great day.
Good.